Hey, what's up? In the last lesson, we learned the difference between calligraphy, typography, and lettering, remember? In this one, we'll be talking about some basic typography concepts applied to the three styles. You may think of them as basic concepts, but I believe it's important to review them. Well, here we have different alphabets. Although we cannot see them, there are some invisible lines which guide the character arrangement. The first one is the baseline, in which each character sits. Then there is the X height, which is a line indicating the normal height of the lowercase letters. Other types of lines are the ones that measure the ascender and descender height. And we sometimes find another line measuring capital letters height, which isn't always the same as the ascender guide. Apart from these, we can also use lines to measure the character's inclination. Well, we could say that all these lines are the base of the skeleton for the characters. When it comes to lettering, as with any other field within the design world, rules can be broken, although it's important to bear these guides in mind and follow them to get good results. Okay? The next we're going to talk about is perhaps the most important typographical correction. Regarding typography and design, we sometimes need to insert some deformations to deceive our eyes. Let's have a look at the following shapes. It seems that the square is bigger than the other shapes, and the circle the smallest one. All of them have the same size, though. After making some corrections, they seem equal in size. As you can see, both the triangle and the circle exceed the square's guides. This optical correction is common in typography and lettering. Have a look at the top of the O, A, and V. They all exceed the guidelines, right? Without this correction, our eyes would see these characters smaller than the rest. However, if the point is flat instead of sharp, we wouldn't need to make such correction. Okay, see it here. Okay, another important aspect is contrast, referring to the difference between thick and thin strokes. We can see it clearly in the three O's on the screen. In the first one, there is no difference. In the second one, the contrast is noticeable. And in the third one, the contrast is quite evident. Let's have a look at the typos on the left. The contrast in the first four fonts are more perceptible than in the last ones. Guys, contrast isn't the same as weight. There are light fonts with contrast, like the first one, or thicker fonts with less contrast, like the fifth one. It's important to be clear about contrast, because it will help us to create our lettering. Therefore, it's necessary to come back to classical typography, on which characters' design is based. There are two ways of drawing thick areas in calligraphy with the tools used in classical typographic techniques. Therefore, we find expansion tools and translation tools. Expansion tools are brushes and pointed nibs, while among translation tools, we find broad-edge nibs and broad-edge bamboo pens. The main difference between them is distribution of thick and thin along the strokes. The expansion technique is achieved by applying pressure in the downstrokes and creating lines with light pressure in the upstrokes. We can see it clearly how it works in this video by Connie Ree. So if we want to imitate this technique, we have to apply pressure in the downstrokes. In the case of translation techniques, the calligraphic effect isn't got by applying pressure, but by moving the pen. Therefore, the broad edge of the pen and its angle determine the stroke's width. Let's see how it works using the brushes in Photoshop. When I use a thick and pressure-sensitive brush, I'll got an expansion tool and would use it by applying pressure downwards and reducing pressure upwards. See? Less pressure, more pressure. It takes practice to become familiar with this technique. The horizontal lines on the canvas determine the point where we need to apply pressure, see? Now I'm going to select a translation tool. This time is a basic brush, not sensitive to pressure. I've modified its roundness and set angle to 45. With this tool, the thinnest stroke we got are those parallel to the inclination angle, and the thickest, the perpendicular strokes. In this case, the distribution of thick and thin along the strokes is established not by the guidelines, but the inclination angle. See? This is the inclination angle. Let's do an exercise. Here we have two typos without contrast, and I'm going to apply it. I'm going to use the expansion technique for the first hello, so I need to figure out which strokes go upwards or downwards. This one downward, this other upward, downward, and so on. Remember that the thickest strokes go downward, so that's what we are going to do. Okay, and after filling the holes and the empty spaces, this is the result. Let's move on to the second hello and apply it to the translation technique. Assume we have a tool with this slope. Therefore, thin strokes will be on those areas with this inclination. Okay, once you spot those areas, just add thick strokes. Well, now that we are familiar with these strokes, we are ready to identify which techniques are used in different typos to create contrast. Have a look at the following. The ones of above have a translational contrast, and those of below an expansion one. Regarding the translation techniques, the inclination angle is different in each of them. In the first one, the guideline is angular, and in the second one, horizontal. As always, breaking rules is possible so that we can create contrast in a non-conventional way. However, bear in mind that our eyes will consider it as something strange, so only use them whenever it's appropriate. Anyways, I recommend you have a look at the traditional typographies to see how contrast has been applied. This way I'm sure you'll do great. The next we're going to talk about is the letter spacing. And like most people may believe, letter spacing is the same for all of them. In this word, the spacing between the letters isn't great. For example, there's plenty of space between the V and the A, and the I and the U, and a small space between the U and the E, although all of them are at the same distance. See? On the contrary, this letter spacing is better despite of the fact they are at a different distance. This happens because it's not a matter of distance, but of empty space between letters. Also, this empty space must be balanced. At first, measuring these parameters is tough. However, our eyes are able of correctly measuring the space between letters, so we just need to train them. If you want to practice and play around, try this game, which consists of moving around the characters and getting a balanced letter spacing. Then you can check if your result is correct or not. Just to finish, I would like to mention how important coherence is when it comes to typography or lettering. We need to be particularly careful and pay attention in order to get a coherent typography and all of them look the same. For example, if we are working with round shapes, we have to follow this style for the whole composition. If we are working with serif style, use it for all the letters. Or if characters have inclination, we must use the same angle in all of them. It would make sense to use a different inclination, right? Well, after this review about basic concepts, we are ready to start drawing our first words. So see you in the first lesson.